Hi, my name is Sherlock Holmes and I'm the CEO of Genware Computer Systems. I'd really like to thank you for joining us on this webinar today. I'd like to just take a quick minute to introduce our organization. I like to think of us as the smallest global company. Genware Computer Systems is headquartered and is a New Jersey-based corporation. Our offices are in Wayne, New Jersey. We have offices across the USA. Genware services the USA, Canada, and Latin America. In the United Kingdom, we have a joint venture with DataShack, where we provide analytics and advanced data science solutions. In Africa, we have a partnership with DataShack, and we have a joint venture in the Genware Shack. We also do natural language generation in the USA, but in Africa, we have NLG Africa that handles that. For all of our business in Mexico, we work with our partner Linko. What I'd like to point out is that throughout the organization, we are all TIBCO elite partners. To achieve that status, you have to have many certifications and obviously well-vetted experience. Genware has also been a multi-year award winner as TIBCO Partner of the Year. Our focus today is on implementing analytics in manufacturing, and we'd like to share some of the findings and then get in and actually roll up our sleeves and show you how we do some of these things. But when you start looking at the drivers of Industry 4.0, and I'm sure many of you have already started embarking on some of these roads, the efficiencies gained by optimizing your business and leveraging information across the organization is astounding. Overall equipment effectiveness only at 60% and world-class manufacturers is at 85%. The increase over there is phenomenal and has a huge impact on the bottom line. We look at process control and the impact of process control and process optimization as it pertains to raw material usage, reduction in scrap, improvement in quality, and so forth. But one of the things that I'd like to share firstly is that we do find a couple of common challenges across the organization. So our solutions fit in. I think this is a great slide from the TIBCO manufacturing slide deck that outlines all the areas in which we implement analytic solutions, whether it's the overall equipment effectiveness, whether it's process optimization. Throughout the organization, there are strategic initiatives that are being implemented, but the challenges that we find that are consistent is the inability to integrate data from different sources. So what you have is you've got all your operational sources, maybe your ERP and MRP systems, you've got your financial systems, but you also have process control systems, and you have real-time streaming data from those systems. Taking data from your process control and combining it with a bill of materials and identifying the raw materials that went into that batch, combining that with recipes and identifying the golden batch, therein lies a lot of value and a lot more in-depth analytic capabilities. Second thing that we find is that because of these silos of data, analytic projects often get done in silos. We may have an engineering team using data scientists to actually do some predictive modeling for them or implementing machine learning, and therein lies a lot of ROI on its own. On the other hand, we may have business analysts exploring the cost of raw materials and how it's being used, and therein lies value too. Combining them together and operationalizing your data science, taking that data science output and integrating it into your visual analytics, bringing streaming data into that analytics. Now all of a sudden you gain yet an even higher ROI because you're looking at the business organization as a whole, and you're able to look at information from different pieces, comparing it with each other. In order to do that, Genware works with TIBCO to leverage their connected intelligence platform. This takes into consideration the data integration components with technologies that let us do master data management and data virtualization for streaming and real-time data. It allows us to provide visual analytics and data exploration through TIBCO Spotfire, and it also allows us for the advanced data science to rapidly deploy and build new algorithms and models from which predictions can be made. So machine learning, data science, and streaming analytics all come into play. We also use natural language generation to produce narratives to clearly communicate what all this information is telling us or what a dashboard is telling us. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter for today. They will take you through the use cases that are pertinent to your industry, and they will show you actual examples of how we use the technologies to solve some of the common problems. Thank you very much again for joining us. Please enjoy the presentation.
Hi, my name's Tim Crocker. I'm a solutions architect with Genware Computer Systems. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about how you can take the process data that you get from your PCS systems and turn it into insight to help you better understand what is going on inside of your manufacturing processes. In addition to that, we're going to use the TIBCO Enterprise Runtime for R to run the data through a Six Sigma model to really understand how much we are in or out of control in our processes. In manufacturing, one of the key metrics is overall equipment effectiveness, or OEE. It is kind of equivalent in manufacturing world to the mythical profitability metric that many companies try to come up with. It really encompasses all the various components of your systems. In fact, if you look at the components of OEE, you will see that there is information that's going to be coming from your ERP systems in terms of schedules. It's going to be coming from your equipment manufacturers in terms of operating specifications for your equipment. It's going to be coming out of your quality department and the information about the products that you're producing, your waste and so forth. And then lastly, downtime and operational statistics about your operation. So in order to come up with OEE, you need to look at a whole lot of data. To do that, we bring to bear a number of different technologies, and these can be plugged and played depending on the needs in any given organization. But if we start over on the left, we see master data management and data virtualization and data catalog. This enables us to go out and open up our existing data silos, pull the data out of those systems into a common virtualized layer, but use the master data management to make sure that all our terms and business terms and third parties and so forth are all consistent across all the different analyses that we might do. Once we get that data staged, we can take machine learning and data science techniques and start to apply that to the data to derive insights that we may not even have known we didn't know about our data. We can take those models that we define and move them into streaming analytics, where we can now monitor the data in real time and predict perhaps when a piece of equipment is going to fail. And then lastly, whether it's through streaming or all the way back into the data virtualization layer, pull that information into enterprise reporting and visual analytics tools that will allow us to get a much better insight into that information. We have mountains of data out there in the manufacturing world, whether it's sensor data, ERP, information coming out of your HR management system and so forth. All of it has to come to bear to start to do overall equipment efficiencies. And to derive information from data, historically, we've used some pretty complex tools. Statistica, also TIBCO Data Science, also a product in the TIBCO suite, has historically been used by engineers on the manufacturing line for producing control charts and understanding what their data is doing in any given set of processes. But in the end, the result of that is still all data. So what we need is a way to look at this in a much more intuitive way. So I'd like to introduce you to the TIBCO Spotfire. It is a radically changed product over the last few years, now with the ability to help you actually analyze your data by automatically looking through your information and performing regressions and finding relationships automatically. So you may not even know there was a relationship between two of your process parameters, but Spotfire may indeed see a high correlation between them, and it will suggest perhaps that you look at those on a chart or a graph. It includes predictive analytics, whether using the built-in tools for doing classification modeling or linear regression modeling, or whether you employ the advanced modeling capabilities of Python, SAS, MATLAB, or TIBCO's own enterprise runtime for R, the ability to take the data and perform predictive analytics around failure of equipments or even forecasting into the future in terms of sales and so forth. Spotfire is going to help you do that. Spotfire will also let you push your analytics out into the mobile world. Imagine your people on the shop floor being able to monitor statistics literally in real time from their phone. We have a simple example here where looking at one particular department, we can, and the CPK value, which is a measure of consistency, as you know, in manufacturing, we can see that Department D perhaps is having a problem with their system. We drill in, we see that perhaps Department D, and we can continue to drill in until we see an individual parameter that perhaps needs a little bit more attention. We can finally drill in and actually see the performance of that metric against its target and the upper and lower statistical measures. Today we're going to be looking at some data that's already been processed through a data science platform. Calculations such as the Process Capability Index, or CPK, have already been calculated for us. It's particularly useful in its ability to look at an overall manufacturing process across all the different parameters and give you a high-level process capability index that you can use then as a guide to drill in to do some root cause analysis where things may not be going right. So let's move over to a demo. I'm going to begin with Spotfire as a blank slate. This is the screen that you would see anytime that you opened up Spotfire Analyst. This is the thick client desktop tool that the power user is going to use to either do data discovery or build analyses for other users to consume. The first thing that we always do in Spotfire is load data. To do so, we either click here in the blue circle that we see, or that's the same as clicking over here in the authoring bar and saying that we want to add. Spotfire is making some initial recommendations to me. Here's some charts and graphs and dashboards and so forth that I've looked at before. Down here, we've got some recent data set that I've used before. I'm going to go ahead and choose my operational data and bring that into Spotfire. At this point, should I choose, I have the ability to add transformations into my data. I could do normalizations, pivots, change data types, and so forth. We're going to leave our data alone today and just bring it in as is. Now we've got 53,000 rows of process data sitting inside of our system. So let's go ahead and see if we can't make something meaningful out of this quite quickly. I have some options. I could explore my data by searching. This is a great tool that TIBCO Spotfire has put in. It allows me to find information simply by looking for it. Or I can start by looking at a visualization I know I might want to look at, or I can start with my data. Let's begin there. When I click on Start from Data, the data panel opens and I see all of the columns that were in my data set organized by category. So we have numbers, we have currencies, time, and then we have our categorical data, and then lastly, some identifiers. I happen to notice in currency that these two numbers aren't really currency, and perhaps the data type that came in out of the database, Spotfire is interpreting that. So Spotfire does give you the ability to do data wrangling up front. Here, I can see all the properties for that particular data type, and in fact, I can say I would like to categorize that now as a number, and I'll do the same for my unit energy here as well, and now they are appearing up here. Here's my process mean. So this is an example of what we would see for a metric. We can see the min and max and average values. We get a nice histogram of what the distribution of those values look like. We can see its data type, how that might be formatted. Most importantly, we can set a default aggregation type. This is really useful when we start to analyze the data, because Spotfire will automatically aggregate it using an average or a sum or any of the other multitude of aggregation capabilities that Spotfire has. So the other thing that we can do is we can look at multiple variables here. And when I do so, and I look at recommendations, here is where Spotfire is starting to look at those two variables, and it's making recommendations of charts or graphs that you might want to use to take a look at how that data relates to each other. I'm going to begin today with a visualization. So because it's process data, I'm going to build myself a line chart. And Spotfire is pretty smart. It goes and it finds my date time column for me automatically, and it puts it on my x-axis. And it has found a measure of some sort and move that onto my y. So what I know that I'm going to want to do is have my lower statistical limit. I'm also going to want to have my upper statistical limit shown. I would also like to put my target value for my parameter. And then lastly, let's go and add the actual process mean in there so that we can see. Now, I know my data a little bit better than you do already, and I happen to know that I have multiple products being produced over multiple lines, and there's multiple different operating parameters included in this data. So now what we need to do is set our context, and we do that using the Spotfire filter panel. Every row and column of data is represented in the filter panel. Spotfire will pick an appropriate device for you and use that. So here, for example, let's focus only on product A. So I'm going to turn off my other products. You can see my chart immediately begin to respond. Now that I've filtered down to product A, if I come down a little bit further, we see only the parameters for the manufacturing process applicable. So now if I pick diameter B, now we see our lower statistical limit, we see our target, we see our upper statistical limit, and in this particular case, our process mean is not performing very well. You can see it is very high up here in close to the upper limit. If I then toggle through each of my different process metrics, I can very easily see how they're performing. But maybe I want to see them all at once. And so Spotfire will allow me to drag my parameters out onto my screen, and I can say I would like to trellis it by parameter. So now when I look at all 12 of my values and I tell Spotfire that I would like to use multiple scales, I'm able to see all of my parameters independently. Moreover, now that I have my data sitting inside of Spotfire, I can take that information down to a daily level, see it far more granularly, or perhaps let's even drill in a little bit further and let's take that all the way down to an hourly level and see the most granular level of data I have available to me. Here we can see I've got a very erratic thickness D occurring on this particular product. Perhaps I want to drill into that. So one of the things that Spotfire will let me do as of one of the newer versions is I can actually have a chart drill into itself now. And so by making a couple of quick settings in the data properties of my chart, now wherever I drill, I can automatically drill in and see the individual parameters of just where I'm marked. I can use my axis to do exactly the same thing and drill in and get a far more granular look at my set of parameters. So that's kind of the basics of working with Spotfire. Now what I'd like to do is transfer over and show you a pre-built application. Here on our screen, we have a completely fleshed out application using the data that we saw in the previous part of the demonstration. Here what we've done is created a situation where we were using a tree map to understand the big picture of our whole operation and where in that operation we might be having some inconsistencies. We use the select hierarchy option over here to literally organize that tree map dynamically. If I want to look at things by department, skip over line and operator, perhaps then I want to see things by product and then by parameter. When I look at this particular chart, I see a lot of blue, very low values here for CPK in Department A and for Product A. So let's drill in a little bit. Now I can see a little bit more closely what's going on. So now I'll say, thickness A is obviously a problem. It's got a very low value here. Let's go ahead and run that through the quality model. So we hit run, and all the data points related to this particular parameter right now are actually passing through an R model that's doing a Six Sigma analysis for me based on a number of rules. The rules are toggled on and off here, but there's a bit of description over here in this jQuery accordion, and I can see the rule 1 is how many points are above a particular line, rule 2 is on the same side of line, and so forth. If I come and I hover over anything that's showing as red, it's telling me that this is in fact violated rule D, which is telling me there's more than 4 to 5 points on the same side of the center line. If I decide that that's not a problem, I can turn that rule off, and I can go ahead and rerun my analysis now, and we will see in fact that more of my data points now are not violating a rule, but if we go and we click here, we can see that these points are violating rule B. Similarly, I can go and I can look at any particular parameter that I want simply by using my tree map as my selector and being able to go in and look at that data over time. Here you can see an obvious, very odd situation in terms of that specific parameter. That might warrant a little closer look. So let's go and take a look at the process mean and see how that thing was actually running. Here we can see still the whole hierarchy that we defined earlier, but we're now drilled in specifically to that individual mass E that we were looking at earlier, and we can see in fact that the process mean here is consistently running above target and consistently jumping up over our higher statistical limit, and therefore it's something we might want to take a little bit closer look at. But now that I'm here, I can do that same sort of analysis against any of my other processes and very quickly understand how well they are or are not working for me. We take that a step further. Using the tree map, we can identify areas where we have a problem using the color coding that we see in our legend. Here I've clicked on thickness A. We can see how that's been trending with this particular parameter and product over time, and we can see we're actually trending downwards a little bit in terms of our process mean, but we're seeing a forecast here that's being generated for us automatically. As I pick and choose other variables in my analysis or even multiple variables, I'm able to see all of those and very quickly understand how they're performing. Spotfire also gives us a number of other ways of looking at data. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. This is also a manufacturing process, but is more of a continuous process where we have an input and output and a lot of different parameters for that particular process. Our output in this case is an oil that's coming out of an input of mud and steam and water that's being pushed into this process. It's being cleaned up and pushed out the other side. So here you can see very quickly, I can choose any of my different variables and very quickly sort of see how each of them is performing against one another. And moreover, I even have the ability to turn off the trellising capability and look at the lines overlaid if that's more informative to me. When I'm looking at my manufacturing processes, any given day I may have better, this particular process, better output than another. There's a lot of parameters and settings that my engineers can work through. So I'm trying to understand what things might be impacting my output the most. So here I've used one of the built-in tools for Spotfire that does linear regression for us. This will allow me to choose a variable for whom I'm trying to determine a response, and then look at all the various explanatory variables that I might want to bring in. I say okay, and it builds this regression for me, and it sorts everything for me in order. And you can see here that my correlations actually in this data are not really high to any specific parameter. So perhaps more investigation is needed. Here now, I've used that information to see if in fact those variables are going to help me predict. So I've done what's called a regression model. Here we've seen the variable importance has been calculated for me, and I could actually use these parameters to go ahead and predict what the production would be based on these settings. And this is a way that Spotfire can sort of begin that citizen data scientist before you move into the hardcore TIBCO data science environments to determine more robust models. When we look at the output from our processing, we can see that when we bin it according to standard deviation of across one variable, that we have different levels of operating parameters. Here I can see, which days were my best production. I'm able to highlight some of those here, and I quickly see that those days of higher production were all where my standard deviation of this particular temperature variable were much higher. So let's go in a little bit further and maybe try to understand that a little bit more. What Spotfire will allow me to do is take all of my different parameters, and here you can see them all normalized, and I've created what we call a k-means cluster against that. Using the Spotfire Tools menu, we have the ability to create a cluster based on either correlation similarity, Euclidean distance, and I can determine even how many clusters I want to have. Once I have that cluster done, then I can go and I can take a look at my production. So here you can see my oil output that I'm looking at. Some of the clusters are obviously performing much better than others. Here I can see by day how we were performing. Well, what clusters were those? And in fact, you can see again that we've tied it into the clusters 7, 8, 3, and 4, and so forth. If we take that a step further, I can use that clustering to now color information on a scatter plot. Here I'm looking at a pressure variable versus the treater temperature we were looking at. And here it's pretty obvious that we've got some step changes over time between different ways we are operating. And the clusters themselves have really sort of helped us understand that. In fact, we can look at each of our clusters independently, and we can see here that certainly cluster 9 is all of the stuff that was in the higher pressure, but the stuff that was higher temperature now really does cross a couple of the different clusters. I'm able to use this context to then go back and understand as well how this might be affecting, are those my highest producing days, which clusters and so forth are working. So this is just a really nice example of interacting dynamically with the statistical tools inside of Spotfire. And with that, I'm going to turn back to my PowerPoint presentation. So TIBCO and Spotfire are very highly regarded in industry. I've been working with Spotfire myself now for 10 plus years. I've seen just amazingly robust adoption by engineers in manufacturing, oil and gas, people with a real need to understand how to get in and look at processes and do root cause analysis and so forth. We also have validation from a number of other industry analysts as well. And in the end, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your data and the people and processes you have, and you're trying to connect them with visual analytics and predictive and streaming in order to get an overall picture of everything that's in your organization and improve your overall manufacturing effectiveness. Spotfire data streams, we did not talk today, but this is an emerging technology for Spotfire where we can now have living, breathing visualizations inside of Spotfire. Watch the needle bounce per se. Additionally, from within Spotfire, on that streaming data, we can now define alerts dynamically to inform us when a threshold has been exceeded, when a model perhaps is predicting failure and so forth, and have it inform us so that we don't have to constantly watch every single metric, every piece, every parameter on all the pieces of equipment that we have.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Hopefully everybody on this session gained some value. Obviously there was a great introduction as well as a lot of in-depth information. And in the time span today, we had to pick a couple of selective use cases. But what I'd like to come back to is just the fact that analytics integrated into the manufacturing organization can occur in so many different places, and there's everybody in the organization gets involved. Our findings are, number one, if you don't have a proper data platform to serve up the data that you need to integrate both streaming data and static data, you're going to end up with silos of information. There's so much more value in combining that information, being able to analyze that. Data science, you need technologies that can really get you going fast. I think in the data science presentation, we showcased TIBCO data science and how easy it is to actually get rolling very quickly with that to create predictive and machine learning models. We explored visual analytics in depth in the visual analytics webinar, showing a combination of streaming and static information, but also showcasing how information produced by the data scientist and then combined with information in other areas of the organization adds so much more extensive value. So in conclusion, the TIBCO Connected Intelligence Technologies allows Genware to assist our customers with implementing solutions in each of these processes. We would love to meet with you, discuss how we've implemented this in other cases, see some of the challenges that you're having, and maybe show you how we could recommend a solution using this technology stack and our expertise to get you where you're moving to. Thank you very much again for your attendance.